And people look at, well, actors like Stallone are getting $20 million a picture. Isn't that enough for them? They have to strike, and it's like none of the above the title actors are working under the contract at contract, daily rates. They all negotiate giant. You're all free. Any actor is free to negotiate a higher salary, but that minimum salary is what is in the contract. And that's the only thing in the contract that, other than working.
And I always contend that that's what it always boils down to. It's like, if you can't say no, you're not negotiating. You're just working a few days less as a waiter.
Somebody once gave me a good description of it. He said, the above the line, the up in the credits thing, your job is no longer to act. Your job is to put butts in seats.
Yeah.
And so that's why you get the big money, because your name up there means people will go see the movie.
Bill, clean show.
Yeah. You think Bob Iger is going to put a question in on today's show?
Oh, thank
Bob,
you.
Come on in.
Yeah.
I'm wearing my union hat.
So that makes sense. If you're contributing to the overall success of it by some star power, rules change.
And then I had a discussion I was talking with my wife about it yesterday. That sounded really harsh. I had a discussion. No, my wife and I were talking about it. And I said, if you're like the producer of Seinfeld.
Hang on a second, Chris. Liberty, can you do a quick mic check? Because we're only a couple minutes for show.
I can definitely do a mic check. Greetings, everyone. This is Liberty White going in through a Shure MV7 directly into...
You're good.
Awesome. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Chris. And everybody else. Yes, good morning, everybody.
I was about to say, what about the rest of us?
Mostly me.
Jeez.
We were feeling left out.
Mostly me, right?
What do we chop liver out?
No love.
You are the faithful Monday, well, most of you everyday crew, but Chris, graces us with his presence every...
I have a much more difficult life than it used to be.
Who let the dogs out? $103 today in Albuquerque. Fun.
We used to call that spring in Scottsdale.
I was about to say, or Tuesday in Scottsdale. I don't know if you saw Bill, there's a little note in the second question.
I just looked down and saw Dave's highlight, so thank you.
The unit in question has a baby pin on a sliding arm on the side of it, but not on the top of it.
Yeah, I think I have the answer to that.
I think you and I asked that question the other day. We were talking about it.
Maybe.
Putting
That's
a baby pin on a C-stand.
That last line would have confused me, though, so thanks.
Greetings and welcome to Office Hours. If you are new here and you want to learn a little bit more about what we do, head over to officehours.global. Our first hour, we answer your questions on media and digital productions. Our second hour is something that we typically want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we'll be discussing time management. They say we all have the same amount of time, but how is it that you are being productive? We'll answer those questions in the second hour. And speaking of questions, Bill, let's get into it.
Our first one this morning comes from Funchak Dorji in Dharamshala, India. And the question is, my friend wanted to buy a Sennheiser EW100 portable wireless mic. That's the 100 ENG G4-A. The vendor sent him a photo of the box where the word adapter is spelled ADAPATER in one place. Chinese copycat. And then he's got a link there to it.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Well, I'm a notorious bad speller, but I'm not a Chinese copycat. It might be. I mean, here's the thing. The general rule of thumb, and it's really about security on buying things from sites you don't recognize, is always be careful. And always, if the price is too good to be true, it probably is.
All right, Courtney.
Well, you take that picture and send it off to Sennheiser and ask them, and they'll tell you if it's a knockoff or not, for sure. But a lot of these companies, farm out their printing to China. So if they have to do a big production run, and that is one of their most popular microphones, the 100 series, they sell a whole lot of them. So they may be having their printing done in China and just never bothered to proofread the packaging when 500,000 of them came back.
And Bill?
The first time I was ever in Manhattan as a young man, I was wandering down through the electronics area, and I thought, wow, look at the price on that very cool product that I really wanted. And I kept saying, but there's something a little odd going on here. And then I realized the name was Panasonic, but it had an O in the middle of it in the wrong place. And I went, people have been saying beware. So I think most of the major manufacturers do not do printing errors. So whenever I see something that's misspelled, I always call that a red flag.
And go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, it's one thing to see it in a press release or in some kind of promo material, but the amount of cost that goes on with the boxes, it would be very rare for a large corporation to have a typo. So I would assume that it's a counterfeit.
And Courtney?
Funny story. This is to tell you, always proofread everything before it goes to the final. I did a film in film school, and I did the credits. And back then we had to send them off to a typesetter who would typeset them and create a codolith. And then you'd get the codolith back, you put it on a light box and shoot it with film. We got through that whole process, and the credits came up in the final answer print, and it said a flim by. FLIM.
Oh, no.
Instead of FILM. Everywhere the word film appeared, it was FLIM. The typesetter made a mistake. Well, we didn't catch it until it came up in the answer.
And Bill?
Since we're doing anecdotes about typos, somebody once pointed out that on the very first interstellar satellite, somebody had written in the year 1967 AD, and then somebody came back and said, well, technically in Latin, the AD, Anno Domini or whatever it is supposed to come before the number. So our first intergalactic communication had a typo. That always made me feel better from that point on.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. Help, I need a baby pin coming out of the top of, and he's got a link there to the product. I thought Matthews had one that would go into the pipe, but I can't find it.
Jason?
So if you look in the user's manual, I don't see any space for a baby pin. If you can adapt it, of course, a standard baby pin like this one is available for the sliding piece, but not for the top. I think you would actually have to add another piece to the top of that, and I can't find it either. Alex?
Yeah, you can oftentimes look for it. So Cardellini makes a lot of different things, and one of them they make, and I don't know if it'll fit this one specifically, is a 5/8" baby pin to 1" post adapter. You can find that probably in Adorama and other places like that. Film tools. So you're looking for that post adapter from Cardellini. Of course, you could, in a pinch, take Cardellini. The Cardellinis also have clamps. So if you needed to do something today, you could order a clamp that would a Cardellini clamp that would just let you just spin it on and just attach it in any direction that you needed to. There's lots of Cardellinis. So that would probably one way to just kind of manage that, but they do have different things that are designed to go on the end of posts that will give you that baby pin back. And of course, if you have an arc welder, you can take something that will go on top of that and then weld the baby pin. We weld a lot of baby pins onto things because it's just they're specific, and then we have a generalized connection to that piece of metal.
Mitchell?
Alex, would that be the same way you could get a baby pin on the end of a C-stand?
Well, the C-stand generally ends with a baby pin. I mean, it ends with what is a baby pin. So a typical C-stand will end that way. Now, where you might not see that as a junior stand that has wheels and it's much larger, is going to come up with a larger head. And at that point, there are definitely adapters for that will convert that to a baby pin.
And Courtney?
Yeah, I was just going to say the other thing you could do is just slide the offset arm up to the top. Sorry, I disappeared.
Offset.
There we go. And it has a baby pin on it. So if it's slid up to the top, and you can move that baby pin closer to the center post if you want. I'm invisible. Okay, I'm sorry.
We're doing some magic this morning. Next question.
My ATEM is all messed up. Jeez, I'm sorry.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. Where can I get a recipe to turn my 3 40-foot high cube cargo containers, or Conex, into an audio-video studio that could be transported? What do you estimate it would cost?
Bill, go ahead.
Well, if you're actually trying to do work out of it, it would probably cost a lot. And the reason I say that is because, first and foremost, those containers are a bit hard to work with. They are typically flat wall cubes, and that is one of the most difficult audio environments to work in. So you're going to have to put a lot of, if nothing else, sound abatement stuff inside, which is going to lower the amount of space you have to work in. Also think about airflow, which is very difficult. So I think you're engaging a lot of welders to cut into the sides of these things and make it a livable, workable environment. It's probably going to be a lot more expensive and a lot more difficult than it looks on the outside. And I think at some point, that's why people mostly go with trailers rather than shipping containers in terms of remote production vehicles.
And Alex?
Yeah, it's really the transport for those containers that make them hard, because you still have to load them onto a flatbed and then be able to it seems like it'd be easier, but it would be, as Bill said, easier to get usually a production trailer. And you can get those if you look at Marketech. They have some. I used to own one. It was a 24-foot Marketech trailer, and you're going to find that to be a lot easier to build a small production. If you really want to use these, I have 2 words for you: plasma cutter, because that's what you're going to need. So basically, you can do a lot of other things. You can use an oxyacetylene torch, but the plasma cutter is way more fun. And so you just ground that thing, and you can sit there and just draw little lines and cut holes out of it. And you're going to need holes, obviously for your cabling. You're going to want to build connection points. And the way that I believe that some large racing organizations use these containers to do a lot of these types of things, but they build them out. And one of the things they do is they really build big cables that pretty much have all the connections in them that move from one to the other to build that out. And so you could build something into that it's not so much, it would probably be less expensive than buying so a production trailer empty, I think, is about $30,000. And you can get them used for $15,000 or $20,000. It's going to cost you at least that to convert just the mechanics of these out, to do this. So it's going to cost you, I would say, $20,000 to $30,000, unless you do it all yourself. It's going to cost you a lot of money to bring specialists and that's before you add the electronics. And the electronics will scale up to as much money as you have, as far as how much you put into the containers themselves. But it would be cool to build something that was stationary that did that. That's kind of cool.
Go ahead, Jason.
I have a client who has built 2 kind of shopping centers out of these, and I've had to put infrastructure in them. It's not easy. It's kind of an acoustical and cooling nightmare, and because of the design, you get a ton of slapback. So good luck, but yeah, it's doable.
And Chris.
Paul, I would think the only place that would really benefit from building this into a Connex is if you were going to actually ship it, like put it on a boat, I think, because that's what they're designed for. But if you're like building something to like go into town to do, South by Southwest or something, I totally agree with what everybody else is saying. Put it into a trailer or something like that. What I would do if I had 3 40-foot Connex boxes and all of your land is I would build like a modular, stacked up kind of cool home with them. Maybe make one the second floor. That's what I'd do with them.
And Alex?
I'm going to second Chris's. When I saw that you had those trailers, the first thing I saw is that there are so many cool kind of high art houses that are built with those containers, and 3 of them would build an awesome container. So
the way you do it is you put 2 of them about parallel. A container width apart. You offset them to give you some stuff, and then you put one across, and then you build like an atrium in between the 2 that are separated from each other.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Let's do that.
Now let's go to
and then
add some video. Add some video to the upstairs, and now you have your production. The upstairs container can be production.
Just make a video about making a house out of Connex containers instead of building a studio. You can put that in a trailer. Yeah. Much easier.
Next question.
From Jack Dorji is back from Dharamshala. Greetings, panels. While deciding on a monitor for multi-view for ATEM SDI Extreme ISO, which factors should be considered? 60 or 75 hertz, the size, VESA mounting, the brand, Dell, Samsung, or LG?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I would go with HP, believe it or not. I've got 2 HP Z24Fs here. And here's the thing, 24 inches is a sweet spot because you're definitely going to get 1080 out of it. And always buy the same monitor because you never know when you're going to mix and match things down the road. I've had absolutely 0 problems with this setup. And sometimes if you move things around, it's nice to know that you can get 1080 over here, and you get 1080, and you get 1080, and you know how it goes.
Alex?
Yeah, the main thing is that I use Dell monitors. I have 6 of them here right now. so they are relatively inexpensive. They're solid. They work well. They work with all the things, and they fulfill the 3 things that I have to have in a monitor, which is I need a VESA mount, I need a C13 power input. So that's an IEC cable, C13, and it needs an HDMI. So I need to have those things in a monitor. If I have those, then they're all in the same space. 1080p is important for what you're doing. You don't need 4K, I don't think. You could. The only reason you might use 4K is if you have if you want to display other things. So for instance, if you use the SDI version of that Extreme, you could theoretically be routing a bunch of things into some kind of 4-up split and then put it on there. And then the 4K makes a difference. If you're doing basically a multi-view inside of a multi-view, you could do the multi-view of your switcher, but then you could have program right next to it. But program is 1080p in a 4K in that split. Or you could have preview and program that are 1080p in that 4K split, and then you can have your multi-views down below. A lot of times if we're using multiple multi-views out of a bigger switcher, we might have preview and program on the top 2 quadrants, and then on the second 2 quadrants, we'll have the main multi-view and then the next multi-view, which is just a whole bunch of cameras and inputs and so on and so forth. And so you can stack up a 4K monitor with a lot of signal. So that's the only reason you might want to think about a 4K is if you think you might want to grow into that. You'll still need a 4K multi-view generator. So that's going to cost you more money, but that's something to think about if that might be something you want to do in the future.
Chris?
Well done, Alex. You just spent all of his money. No, what I was going to say,
it's my job.
I know it's your job. I agree with everything I've heard so far, except Alex gets in the weeds sometimes. The Dell monitors is the one that I'm using, and they're like $175 US. So it doesn't have to be super expensive. Keep in mind whenever you're buying monitors, there's 2 reasons you buy a monitor: to critique something or to just look at something. And the output of the multi-view, you really just have to confirm that there's a signal there. You're not doing anything really critical. And so the Dells that I bought and put on the VESA mount, which I really just learned, I really just sort of adopted VESA mounting in the last couple of years, and I really like it. Like I said, I think they were like $175 US.
And Courtney?
Well, there's some that are even cheaper than that. I was just looking at the Dell. They have this 27-inch SE27. It's full HD 27-inch, And I think it has a variety of inputs. The nice thing about the Dells is they have a variety of inputs, but they don't have SDI. And I don't know if the multi-view output on the ATEM SDI is SDI or HDMI, but you might have to get a converter to convert from SDI to HDMI to go into that monitor if SDI is your only option for multi-view coming out. In that case, I would get a decimator, MDHX, to convert it. This one also supports AMD FreeSync, which synchronizes the display's refresh with the vertical sync pulse coming from your computer. So that's good. There's no tearing or anything at any higher refresh rates.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Eric Hertz in Hartford, Connecticut, I believe. No, I'm sorry. I got it wrong. Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. Apologies. Logitech bought Blue, from the Blue Yeti and Snowball. A lot of podcasters have those. What do you think of these mics, and will Logitech keep evolving them? They cost around $40, but there's one model that is $3,000.
Mitchell.
Yeah, I like Blue, and I like Logitech. I think that all makes sense, and I think they make nice products at that price range. But I have absolutely no idea what that $3,000 Logitech microphone. I mean, think for a second. Neumann or Logitech? I don't know.
Bill?
One of the metrics I use when I'm determining whether a piece of gear has any chance of being both excellent and reliable is think about the manufacturing things. In most cases, manufacturing any product, you maybe have 20 or 30% of the actual cost of that in the parts that go into it. Outside of that, you have construction or, production costs, you have marketing costs, you have everything else, and then a profit margin. So for a $40 thing, it's probably got $4 to $6 worth of parts in there. Now, that doesn't mean it's not functional and useful, but that means you're talking about inexpensive off-the-shelf parts that are going to have a failure rate that is not the same as someone building a $500 or $1,000 microphone who are going to be doing all the make sure that everything we put into this device upholds our reputation. So when you get down into that kind of $40 microphone things, maybe you get lucky and maybe it's just fine and it does a job for you. And if so, you've won the lottery here. But it's also equally possible to run into all sorts of problems that just waste your time after that because there's just no margin in there to really make a really good quality overall product. That's my philosophy. Your mileage may vary.
And then just pulling in from the comments, Mickey says, Blue used to make the Blue Bottle microphone, excellent vocal mic. So yeah, this is, we'll see what else they roll out and if they evolve on their product line. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Eric Hertz in Hartford, Connecticut. And Eric says, when you produce corporate webcast events, what live streaming service do you use? Do you typically use a customer-provided service account, or do you reuse and resell or use your own service accounts?
Jason?
Well, that depends very heavily on the contract itself. I've used Restream to actually do the lifting, but as far as the account itself is concerned, unless I have straight in access to the client's YouTube, and sometimes even if I do, I won't use it. I will use it kind of as a secondary, and that's just because anytime I've got more than one set of fingers in a pie, it can get tricky.
Alex?
Yeah, it really depends on scale. So a lot of times clients are going to have their own platforms that they want to stream to. So they have their own. They're using YouTube, they're using, they might be using their own higher end version of those kinds of things, their own Vimeo accounts. So a lot of times we try to use theirs if they already have something they want to use. But we also provide Akamai services and so on and so forth. So we're, 090 is a reseller for Akamai. So if they want to, if they want to stream it and really have their own custom player and custom setup, we can do that as well. But usually when we're providing that, we're not really providing our YouTube channel or even our Vimeo channel. We're providing industrial grade video streaming services. And so it just depends on what they're doing. But if they're doing it on their own, typically we'd recommend, if they have any plan to go to YouTube or other things in the future, is to go ahead and start doing it then.
And for our producers, keep those questions coming. And remember that this show is driven by you. So as you submit your questions, also look at some of the questions there and vote up and the ones that you think could be used maybe at a later time. Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas says, it took about 2 days, but personal voice finally kicked in and I got it to read several long articles in my voice. My wife and friends were blown away at how much it sounded like me. So what's next? Can it be extended via an Apple API? And if so, what apps?
Courtney?
Well, what's next, Paul? The obvious solution is you change the wake word on Siri to be, hey, Paul. So that anytime they say, your wife says, hey, Paul, can you go out and mow the yard? Siri will respond and say, in your voice, and say, no, I don't think I could do that. Yeah.
Bill?
So there's a lot of discussion of this. And I am noticing now, since I'm dabbling a little bit in the audiobook thing, that there are specific contractual pieces that are showing up in a lot of voiceover contracts that specifically preclude AI being used in any form to submit work that you want to make money off of. This is going to be this ongoing jiggling as to how these things fit into our world. They are obviously coming. They are obviously going to have a lot of tasks that they can do beautifully. But in terms of the confusion that'll happen, and that was a good example. I mean, how long is it going to take the kids to figure out that I can program mom's voice into this and call the school and say I have a dentist appointment or whatever the thing is? It's going to be hard to tell who's real and who's synthesized in the coming thing, and we're going to have to learn to negotiate through that. Mitchell?
Yeah, as far as what's next, I think an app that can certify that this is the actual voice of the person, even if he's using his animated voice or fake voice on his phone instead of his voice, I think there needs to be some kind of like a little dot or something, maybe that orange dot, they can move that from our monitor to your iPhone so that you know that this is the actual Paul that's calling. Otherwise, he may be selling car warranties and other things.
Alex?
On the brighter side, I think that the ability to send people text stuff, or imagine being able, right now, if you're driving and you get a text, it comes in as the Siri kind of, someone's going to read it out to you or whatever voice you choose. Imagine being able to load that so that someone could, send you a text, not record something, but send it to you, but have it played out in their voice. And so I think you'll see that in the next couple of years of text playing out in a simulated voice. I think for other people's voices, it'll most likely be delivered via cloud so that you're not storing their voices on your device. So it'll play out when you hit it, but it won't be handing you over, their sound. And you can choose whether you want to send them via text or via your simulated voice. But I think that's where Apple may be going with that, to make that work. Other positive things that are there are being able to correct things. We have things where there's one word wrong, and we're playing with Descript to do this, and 11 Labs and a couple other ones where we can, hey, I just need to fix one word or two words in a voiceover or something like that. Or a radio show where someone says something they're inaccurate. I don't want to go back and record it. I just want to paper it over. And I think that those kinds of things, might be possible there. The bottom line is that especially, this has been the case for a long time, but it's just becoming more pointed. You should not trust any single point of truth. No single point. You have to have 2, 3, 4 corroborating pieces of evidence before you should start believing what's in front of you. Because and that has been the case for a long time. But people think that, just because this person said it, it must be true, or just because this is, But we need to start really thinking hard about what we're looking at all the time, and we should have a long time ago, but now we really have to.
Agreed. Mitchell? I'm sorry, Chris?
The one exception to that, Alex, of course, is anything you read off the internet, because all of that stuff is vetted, and we know that's
or anything
true.
that I say or you say. I think that people should just take that as bona fide.
Bill?
Yeah.
How close are we to, though? I do recommend the Widget 5000. I don't recommend the Widget 5000. And anybody on the planet can make that change instantly by search and replace. That will be a mess for endorsement, for curation. It's going to be hard.
You're just gonna need to be able to corroborate it. You're not gonna be able to trust anything that's out there.
So Alex, are you having any success by wallpapering over a couple of words with Descript?
Not yet.
So
not with
trying,
overdub,
but it doesn't quite work.
As I said, we're working on it. So we're working on it. So
what is it that you find? Because we've tried it with like the overdub to try to like smidge it. Is just not smooth enough? Is that
it's just not smooth enough? It just sounds like a little glump. Like it doesn't have, you're in the middle of a sentence or the start of a sentence or whatever, and it doesn't sound like it. The intonation isn't correct. So it feels pretty obvious. The tonal nature of the audio is actually pretty good. I've been testing it on my own. And with mine, we haven't tested. I've been mostly testing it on my own. When I say we're testing it, I'm testing it. But I find that in the middle of a sentence, it just replaces it and it just sounds like a little chunk out. And so it kind of says the word, and maybe someone would just think that there was some problem with their download, but it's not like, oh, I can just put words into someone's mouth.
Right.
Have you tried doing like the whole phrase?
I haven't tried that. Yeah.
I would try that. Also, I think that there's an enormous amount of money to be made. And I put this out to everybody. World, please invent this. You could start by doing it in Final Cut 10. A plugin where you could select a series of words at the end of a soundbite and say, make end of sentence, and it would change the intonation.
Yeah.
That you could charge a lot of money for that, and I promise you people would buy it.
And you do it and for some people, you would do it to every sentence that they did because they all end
because they're up talkers.
They're up talkers.
I have a great idea, and this is how we're going to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
And we will finish our sentence.
You just correct up talking. Just
right.
put a little
Fenwick's
correction tool in
microphone
there. Yeah, exactly.
Mitchell?
Yeah, to Alex's point, we've been listening to it for a long time. Think about all those infomercials where they say, get all 3 pans for $39.25 at this store only. I mean, they do it all the time. So the fake voice, slightly intonation, doesn't seem to matter. People
just because they do it doesn't mean it doesn't matter. So it is. We want to, So the thing is that little bead counters, that are like in their little Excel sheets, have found a way to save money. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't degrade the experience or not feel real or have people think that you're cheap. So the thing is that all those little changes matter. They all of that non-seamlessness that you hear going on. Like you got to understand when you're listening to, they're choosing or not choosing to spend the money on, like when you do a call in, quality of that phone call, the tonal rate, the changes in the noise, is because they paid for it or they didn't pay for it. They did, and so it's just when you hear those tonal changes, it's somebody being cheap, because it doesn't have to be that way. Like someone carved off a corner because they decided that the numbers were more important than people. So just always remember that when you see it change.
Bill?
Chris, the intonation of this is going to be weird because you could take somebody's, I support this product as long as you have great fire suppression in place in your office, to I support this product. That's a pretty big shift in meaning. And if you enable that with a click, is anything trustworthy anymore?
No, nothing is trustworthy. But what I'm telling you, and you know this because I know you do the same thing, I am constant. My biggest complaint editing corporate video is people who think that editing video is like editing a Word document. They're literally picking up in the middle of sentences and just striking out stuff and saying, I don't want him to say that. But
Frankenbiting, we've been doing that.
And
for
he
a long
telegraphs that he did say it right up until the point that you want to cut away from it. The intonation is wrong. But if you could have, the Fenwick intonator, and like you could just select a few words and select different options of intonation, and maybe it even has to slow down the video just a touch as it pitch shifts it down. I'm telling you, that's the plugin I want.
Courtney?
And this technology is one of the reasons you're not going to see any new television shows till the middle of next year, is because the actors are striking over the use of AI to replace their images and voices. Because a lot of actors would have things built into their contracts that they come in and do it. They have 2 or 3 days of ADR scheduled, in their contract, that they would come in and have to do dialogue replacement to, replace some words that were mangled during production, or to do airline versions. That used to be a big thing. Do the clean version for the airlines. They'd have to clean up all the language so it's family friendly. and they would replace all the curse words with, family-friendly curse words. That used to be done. You could always tell when that was done. The lip movement didn't quite fit. But that could all be done by AI now. Whether it can be done well or not is debatable. And I think the technology will improve to the point that it can just analyze the surrounding sentence and automatically generate the fill-in word with the same intonation. It shouldn't be too hard, but it's one of the things they're striking over. So let's see how the strike goes.
And Alex.
And to keep on underlining, you just can't really believe anything that you look at. I mean, there's so many ways that we manipulate the viewer with what we do. And so just for instance, I have 50 people at a protest. If I take the camera and I lift it up 3 feet and point down, the impression that I'm not lying, but the impression is that there's thousands of people there and there's 50 or 10, so news uses this all the time to make something feel bigger, is that they fill the camera frame with the handful of people that are there that are not representative of anything that's going on there. And they pull that out, and it's not lying, but it's not the truth, and so the thing is, and that has happened since we had cameras, so we just have to, as someone who has worked on the teams that are tasked with manipulating that process, I can tell you that it's not by accident. It is a total conversation that we have about the impression that we want to leave the viewer and exactly how we frame it. So it's not uncommon. So just we shouldn't believe anything that's out there. So.
Since we're pulling back the curtain a little bit here, The same thing social-wise. When you look at people's accounts, they're showing I forgot who it was. It was like an NBA player who they showed like they were going on to this helicopter, but you saw that it was locked and they weren't going in. Like that we see that consistently at events. Okay, we've got to make sure we take it from this angle because this whole side is empty and you only want to get this part of it so that because this content is going to be used in marketing material, later on. It's not just that moment. So you're thinking longer wise and ahead. So as Alex said, on this note, Alex is coming back.
Well, the funny thing is that we were talking about the actors. Some of the actors that we've worked with have been actually planning for this for the last decade. They've been getting scans of themselves. So we've worked with actors that get these really high resolution photogrammetry scans. Chris does it a lot. He does it like once a week. I don't know why it's once a week, but he feels like he's really in a changing moment.
He's aging fast. It happens.
Yeah, exactly. So, but these actors, a lot of times when they're younger, they'll do those because they want to be able to license their likeness because they have these high-res scans of themselves at a younger age. So their conversation is, I'm getting these scans in my 20s. When I'm in my 50s and 60s, when we want to do a flashback, I'll be like, I have all this data, of what I looked like and sounded like and everything else, which I can then license back to the film, and that's not the same as the producers just taking it because they don't have that data. The actor has that data and they own that data. And so it's an interesting puzzle, but a lot of them have been thinking about this for quite some time.
Next question.
Eric Hertz in Hartford, Connecticut is up next. Do you use Dante and NDI on the same network? Do you ever use either on a company's corporate network, or do you build your own private network for production with Dante and or NDI?
Go ahead, Jason.
Well, full disclosure, I've never used NDI in production. It scares me. For better or for worse, it does. As far as Dante is concerned, it's typically, at least the primary Dante network, is on its own subnet, but is not actually, at least the backup is also its own entirely different configuration. And doing it any other way, I think, gets really problematic.
Alex?
Yeah, we definitely put Dante at least on its own subnet or its own VLAN. So it'll either have its own VLAN. The NDI, it's hard to keep it on its own network because it really wants to leak out. But NDI is generally on its own network. We will never put Dante, I would never put Dante or NDI on a corporate network. There's so much going on there that the chances of having a breakup-free solution is very low.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael up next with, how do TV broadcasters with a lot of live content comply with FCC audio description requirements? Do they set up a dedicated describers booth or contract remote describers per show?
Courtney?
Well, I'm not sure, but I would think that a remote describer would be possible, since latency probably isn't going to mean a lot, since they can't describe it till after they see it. And so there's going to be a degree of latency anyway on a live show. And the person might be visually impaired anyway, so they may not be able to detect the latency very easily. So that should not be a problem. And there may be a limit on the requirements as for the size of the broadcaster. If it's a small local station that does live news or something, there's not a lot happening in a live news show. Maybe they have to describe the clips that they're cutting to, but it's not like a dramatic show. There aren't too many live dramatic shows. I would say live sports would be the main reason you might need an audio description channel to be helpful in a live broadcast that may be a smaller market live broadcast. But the big boys can afford to hire the live broadcast person and have them in the booth at the live event.
Alex?
Yeah, we've almost always seen audio description done on site. I've not. I mean, I know that it can be done off site, and it happened definitely during COVID, but I've never seen it done anywhere other than on site. Captions are done off site all the time. So captions. We only on the most secure events, big launch events or something, will we see the captioners on site. Generally, they're the entire subsystem of the way AI media / EEG works is designed to let captioners sit in their house and caption away from their living room. I actually asked we were working with some captioners that were on site. And I was like, I always just imagine that you're, kind of in t-shirt and sweats, sitting in your dining room, captioning these shows. How close is that? And they're like 100% accurate. And so they just tune in and start cutting away. So it's a very unique skill, captioning. So they can do it pretty much wherever they want.
And to our producers, we have room for a few more of your questions before we transition to the top of the hour, when we'll be talking about time management and all the tools, resources, and strategies around that. And also remember, your voting matters. Next question.
Next one comes to us from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. Are you going to watch the new Isaac Asimov adaptation of Foundation on Apple TV? How does this story written decades ago hold up in our modern age?
John?
I read all 5 books of the Foundation, which to me are the best. It's the best sci-fi ever written, series of books, and I was super disappointed in this production.
Mitchell?
I think it was 7 books, John, but I know it was a lot of books, and they were very heavy. Very, very deep, very, very widespread, lots of time lapse, lots of robots, lots of everything. And it's very, very hard to follow that when you do a screen adaptation. I did watch the first season, and I had a hard time staying with the subtleties of what was going on there. And I just watched yesterday the first episode of this season, and they're a little bit different, but still, it's very hard to stay with it. So I predict that if you're looking for a swashbuckling space epic, it's not that at all. It's very, very full of political intrigue and subtleties that require a lot of attention to watch it and follow what's going on.
Bill?
Yeah, it's been a challenge. And people have been talking about doing this for decades. And every screenwriter, I think, that's ever approached it runs into this main problem, which is in most works, particularly serialized things, you're introduced to and get to know the characters in the beginning, and then you follow them through the arc of the story. Foundation is unique in that it bounces around so much through time, worlds, scenes, characters, that every time you sit down to watch any part of a new one, you may be in an entirely disconnected scene from everything you've seen before. So you don't build those relationships, that understanding, and it has to be redone every single episode to ground you in who the characters are and what they're trying to tell you. So it's always been difficult. I think they're doing as good a job as you can do, but I think this is something where the book form, which gives you much more ability to introduce, define, and bring a character through an arc in a subsection of a book rather than a 1-hour television show. It's just very hard to do this. I give them high points for doing the best they can, but this is very difficult adaptation in my mind.
And Alex?
I'm curious from John, as someone who read the books. I didn't read the books. What's missing for you in the show? Like,
Bill
why
did
are you disappointed?
Bill did a very good job of explaining, articulating what the problem was, jumping from world to world and trying to follow the storyline. And another interesting real problem I had was the main character was in *Halt and Catch Fire*, and I couldn't get that out of my head in that role, which was really problemsome.
Yeah, I just found no drive to continue. I got about halfway through the series and had no drive to continue watching. Like, it was just the whole family was just kind of like, like no one was asking, like, let's go find something else. So it's, and we've had that problem recently with some of the Disney series as well. I mean, I think overall, I don't know whether it's just being saturated by a lot of these things or not, but we've definitely gotten halfway through a variety of these pieces and just stopped watching somewhere in the middle.
Mitchell?
Yeah, I'd like to amend my comment a little bit. If you haven't read the books, I did, then you're really lost. You're completely lost watching the way they've tried to serialize it in the form of a TV series. And the other thing is, if they have a hard time with Dune, they're going to have 10 times more trouble trying to do Foundation.
Bill?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons Foundation is so widely respected in the scientific sci-fi community is that this was the first time that somebody really managed to do that, decouple character from plot and have such big ideas as you watch these worlds develop and the politics influence them. That was the hook into the stories as you read them, not the characters. But almost everything we've seen since that, and everything we've seen in terms of movies and television shows, is based on characters. So it was a tour de force for Mr. Clarke to be able to make this world without character being the center of the drama.
Bill, that was Isaac Asimov.
Oh, I'm sorry, Asimov. I'm sorry. Yeah, apologies.
Chris?
Yeah, I didn't watch the show at all, but it's been a while since I've heard myself talk. So I had a question for Alex. Alex, do you think the fact that you're cutting off these series early, is that going to help you get through stuff faster that's squirreled away on streaming services, so you'll need new content from Hollywood sooner?
I don't think I need any new content from Hollywood for a long time. I think that's the problem that they're going to have with the streamers is that I feel like it would take me 2 or 3 years to get caught up. So they
But maybe it's less than that now if you're
cutting them off halfway. But
cutting
then you
them
find
off
old
halfway.
ones. But then you find old ones. We got into Person of Interest, and we watched that for, I don't know.
That's a great show.
150 episodes or something like that.
That's
So
a
that was every
great
night for
show.
like 5 or 6 months. And
Yeah.
that ended a long time ago. So it was a really fun show. And then we watched Alias, and that was how many seasons? And then Heroes 1 and 2. And so the thing is that you get into these Heroes 2, by the way, don't bother. Anyway, but Heroes 1 was great. But all I'm saying is that there are so many great series that if you go back 20 or 30 years, I just think that it's a real challenge because I don't feel like they need to I felt like I was excited about every new thing, but now every new thing comes out and I don't find it that good. And I
Renzo's
keep
good.
on digging into the old stuff. What?
I don't think you
Friends.
could binge watch Foundation. I think it would make your head explode.
Oh, I think it'd be much easier, to be honest. I think that's part of the problem is when it came out 1 week apart. I find it so much like I watched Mission Impossible. I watched Mission Impossible 7 yesterday at an IMAX, but I watched all 6 one day. My wife and I watched them day after day after day after day after day to make sure that we were all caught up. And 7 made so much more sense because we watched all 6 in the last week, and it was. And so I think that being able to watch, I actually don't even consider the series anymore until all the episodes are there. Like I won't even start watching it until then because it's just too much trouble to like this whole like 1 a week. I'm like, I'll just wait until it's all there and then I'll watch them all one day at a time. Not in binging, but just one at a time. We go through it. So
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next, and he asked one for me. Bill, you mentioned audiobook contracts are now specifically banning the use of AI. Is this just trying to protect talent's jobs or trying to preserve the quality of the experience for the listener?
Go ahead, Bill.
Probably both. I It's interesting. The contracts are very structured here. And I noticed this probably 5 months ago, that there was very specific language in the contract that says the narrator cannot use artificial voices to accomplish this contract. So it's very specific, whether that will change, whether it's temporary, whether that'll last for a long time, but it is there. So for all the narrators out there who work in the audiobook field, it is specifically contractually precluded. And I can see that, because you're asking, you've got a contract, they're going to pay you a certain amount of money, you're going to turn in this book. If you just run it through chat, or not chat, but if you run it through some audio system and just put that out and say, here, I've fulfilled my contract, pay me my money, they wanted that not to happen, I think.
Right. Courtney?
Yeah, Bill's right. They're just protecting their investment. They're paying you to generate the stuff, and they don't want to get something that you knocked off with 11 Labs clone of your voice. The scarier thing is that the other way around is the voice talent wants to prevent the audiobook seller from taking your previously contracted voice, sampling it, and releasing new audiobooks without paying you for it. That's what you should be worried about. Also, the audiobook industry in general. Remember, there was a big flap about the text-to-speech reader in the Kindle tablet apps you could just take a PDF and have it read it aloud for accessibility versions, and for to meet the accessibility requirements, a lot of them had to include a text-to-speech generator. And that particular synthesizer, text-to-speech, is getting better and better. And if you can train it with a known voice, that's going to maybe eliminate the whole audiobook recording industry if it gets good enough. So they're worried about that as well.
And Chris?
I think this is a challenge to the people that make these pieces of software that take text and synthesize my voice, whatever. Because now they're like, well, all we got to do is fool one of the audiobook companies, because how are they going to know? How are they going to know if it's done with AI or Bill sitting in his booth reading on a microphone? And if they don't know, then the AI wins.
And Bill?
I just have a little anecdote. My wife came in to me the other day and said, "Oh, I've been listening to something on TV. This is undoubtedly AI." And I went in and no, it was one of the reporters from the Ukraine who obviously spoke Ukrainian as their first language, but who was very fluid in English, reading it in English. She took that as being the sound of AI because it was a little stilted. And I was saying, actually, the AI stuff I've heard is more fluid than that. So maybe lack of fluidity might be a human characteristic that they're going to have to program into these things eventually. It's just so goofy out there.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Chris Fenwick in Emeryville, California. Liberty, I have to ask because I've been totally fixated on this detail. Do you have several ladders, one for each outfit you wear? It's a great look. I'm not
Thank you.
kidding,
I see the thumbs up from John there. So this is the one and only ladder that whenever I'm in studio and I'm on office hours, that it just happened to be that today this is what I wore. And I didn't have that. Typically, that I've got the lights on the other side with the color, and just time-wise, it didn't work. So I was like, I cannot have just a plain wall. The ladder. Everyone loves the ladder. So
you just slid the ladder in so the wall wasn't totally plain.
So it was
and
not
it just
plain.
happened to match color.
That is exactly
I'm going to recommend you get some more ladders because the color match is cool.
I never considered ladder as fashion accessory, but now I'm going to have to rethink this whole thing.
This whole thing. Next question.
I've been looking at it all day. Anyway, it looks good.
Thank you, Chris.
Bo Cordell is up next from Charleston, South Carolina, furthering the discussion on digital authenticity. How might blockchain tech be used to fingerprint and verify that a video or audio is what the original creator intended?
Alex?
It's possible, and blockchain could help with that. That's where NFT and a lot of those things, and it becomes much more doable when we have proof of work as opposed to proof of proof of stake as opposed to proof of work. But what I will say is that the problem is that the original creator may intend to mislead us. So you can put that little piece on it, but it doesn't mean that it's the truth. It just means that they did that on purpose.
John?
This is actually a piece of legislation that's being considered, this exact thing right now.
Next question.
Robin Cutshaw in Atlanta, Georgia says, I've used X32 programs like X32 Edit, and they seem very old school. Is there a better program for iOS and or Mac that are more logical and or current?
Jason?
I've spent entirely too many hours and too much money trying to answer this question. There are a fair number. Recently, I've been playing around with MixStation. They updated it as of 6 days ago. The graphics look good. The connectivity seems to be solid. I really like the way that they explain and show EQs. The routing is pretty decent, and it works for more than just the X32. So that's one to take a look at.
And Alex?
Which is funny because the X32 Edit was, I think, purchased because it was the most modern version of what you could do with the X32 compared to what Behringer had. So I think that there is the X32 controls. I will say the software controls are some of the better software controls out there. There's definitely a lot of room for this to be improved in the market.
Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. Up next, Alex, you have you introduced your kids to The Prisoner or Red Dwarf?
Alex?
Not yet, but Red Dwarf is definitely on the list of things too. My wife doesn't appreciate English humor as much as I do, so I think that that usually we watch everything as a group, and that she kind of, it's not really her cup of tea, so to speak.
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I'm interested, Alex, is there any kind of pushback if you go back to something so long ago it's in 4:3, like the original Prisoner and stuff like that, or do they accept that as just like a historical artifact?
They don't really care. Like I found that they can, now most of the stuff I care, so I care about it, and it bothers me, but there's a lot of things that bother me. I asked my wife, I was like, do you see the pattern of the holes in the projection screen? Does that bother you at all on the, when I go to a movie? And she's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm like, well, you will now. so I get bothered by a lot of things, but my kids don't seem to care.
Next question.
Alan Scott in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. Lately, I've been binging the entire run of MASH. I noticed that the opening theme song has had many variations over the seasons. Why would they have changed it?
Alex?
It's actually pretty common. I mean, it's common. Usually what happens is the producer, oftentimes after a season, they threw something together, and then after the season gets through, they're like, I really didn't like that one part, or I really wish this was a little bit better. We now have more budget. There's a whole bunch of reasons that they might want to do it, and it's sometimes every new season is an opportunity to update the music, the open. You'll oftentimes see evolution in that area.
Chris?
There's there's a story about that song, and I can't recall it. And I tried to Google it. I bet you Courtney knows. It's something about somebody tried to write the worst song possible, and Altman loved it and ended up using it. And it was originally written for the movie about one of the characters committing suicide. The song's called "Suicide is Painless," but there's some. I want to say it was like somebody's kid wrote it, and the kid ended up making more money off of it than the dad did, or something. There's a weird anecdote. I wish I knew it. Sorry.
Mitchell?
It was Altman's son who wrote the words to that song. And I think that what happened is it became successful. The subject matter of the song became sensitive to the censorship, and that's the problem. And by the way, for the record, I love the Star Trek version where they sing.
Courtney?
Yeah, it's been said because of the song "Suicide is Painless" promotes suicide. They thought they got a lot of pushback, I think, after the first season or two, but it was, accurate to the original film, which is why they had it for the TV show to begin with. But I think they buckled to the censors.
And for many series too, it's also marketing and part of the community. Like when the series begins, it's like, what is it going to look like, sound like this time around? So that's also a tactic too. Next question.
Next question comes from Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. Twitch told their streamer community that they couldn't have logos take up more than 3% of their screen. They did this within 24 hours. Are things like this why YouTube doesn't have to fight Twitch, which fumbles the ball like this?
Alex?
Everybody fumbles the ball. So every, you're trying to figure something out. There's some reason that you have that there. Probably Twitch wants to make sure that it's making money and you're not making money. They don't want the Twitch, what a lot of all streamers want to make money without paying the network, but the network or the platform though is spending money on streaming all those bits. And so they want to be able to generate revenue. And so there's this push back and forth is the platform trying to pay for the platform and the streamers trying not to pay the platform. And so this tug of war that you see, Twitch has also said that you can't, for instance, stream to Twitch if you're streaming to the same content to other platforms. This is kind of a backwards thinking that happens. Everybody does it for at least a little while, and then everyone just ignores them, and then they just give up on enforcing it. Usually, I mean, they'll enforce it for a while, and what they'll do is they'll hit somebody that's large enough to complain, and then that person will get on a bunch of whole things and rip them apart, and then they'll stop enforcing it, but they'll leave the rule in place. And that's how you end up with like stupid things like Instagrams, like you can only stream from there's no RTMP to Instagram, and then people figure out a way around it. And then the problem is too many stars and other people are using it. They can't really enforce it anymore. So it's probably all these rules that Twitch is doing. They're just, this is their time, their adolescence, where they get to learn all the things that aren't going to work.
Next question.
Kenny Hampton in Greenville, Illinois. From Paul's container question of building a mobile studio, what do you think of building a basic production studio from a nice used towable travel trailer? AC, heat, shore power, and privy installed seems like a cost-effective solution versus a bare box trailer build.
Go ahead, Bill.
A lot of people have tried adapting those. To me, the issue is if you have a built-out trailer for someone to live in and you're going to shoehorn a production facility in there, you're going to be removing in order to put in what you need. Now, I know that where I'm sitting right now, this transported to a travel trailer of some sort would take up maybe 30% of the space that's usable in there. So already I'm kind of fighting it, which is why a lot of people who want to build a specific bespoke studio kind of thing just start with the bare bones and make it all up as they go along.
Alex?
Yeah, the ones you're looking for are toy haulers. So we rent these. There's actually production companies that provide them. And so a toy hauler is something that's designed to actually have something go in the back. When we say toys, we usually mean ATVs or cars or other things, and you get a relatively large one, and it'll have exactly what you're talking about. It has a bathroom, it has a little kitchen, it has places to hang out and sit and talk, but it's got a big open area in the back that was designed to throw a car into the back of it. And we have built many productions in the back of those, in the back of that area, and it works great. We also do production trailers, which we take toy haulers, which are the entire production unit. It was designed to carry cars, and we instead, fill it with gear. So those we definitely use those and fill the whole thing with gear and tow it with a truck. But the RVs are really useful.
Next question.
Gordon Lake in Los Angeles, California. In pre-show, Jason mentioned an app that handles two-step verification. Can you talk about it?
Jason?
Yeah, sure. OTP space auth is my solution to the fact that I am tired of using Microsoft Authentication for Microsoft Authenticator and Google Authenticator for Google Authentication and Facebook and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It just kind of goes on and on and on. It works on the watch. It works on iOS. It works on Mac OS. It syncs nicely over iCloud. And I'm going to get myself out of the way here. Yeah, that'll work. No, not best, but there we go. If you want, grab that QR code because every single one of these looks exactly the same if you're looking at it in the App Store. It's maybe $2 total.
All right. Well, thank you so much, producers, for all of your questions so far in our first hour as we make this transition into talking our discussion around time management and how we can not only managing our day-to-day and our schedules and our projects, but what are some of the ways that you're currently doing that? So feel free, please, to go ahead and submit your questions and panel getting together and getting your hands up and so that you can contribute to this conversation. Time management, like Alex, I see you're already, I just want to say that like I have learned a lot from you, even scheduling wise, because my email, my inbox is something that oftentimes just, get under me. But one of the books that I've read this year that has really helped in that is like the 12-week year. And that just based on how you start your week, how you start your day, and really brain dumping around your major goals and prioritizing them, how that can really impact getting to that next level and just getting things done, get stuff done. Alex?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to this to unpack.
There's so much.
So much to unpack. There's a couple of things though that resonate with me a lot when I think about time management. One of them is it's somewhere on the internet there, and it really got me thinking pretty hard when I saw it. He talks about if you put a bunch of little pebbles into a jar, and then you start trying to put medium-sized pebbles and then big rocks into the jar. You can't fit a lot of big rocks in there because you've already filled it with all the little pebbles, but there's still a lot of air left around that jar. If you put the big rocks in first, and then you put medium rocks and then the pebbles in, you can fit a lot more into that time space, let's say, in that area. And the reason that that's important is not everything is important. If everything's important, nothing's important. And so you have to decide, what are the things that have to get done today? What are the things that have to get done in my life? What are the things that have to get done? What are the priorities? And you schedule those first, and usually those are the bigger, more complicated things, but schedule those first. And then you start scheduling the other things that are around it. So in this case, the way I do that is you'll find that there's a certain time that's very hard to get me to schedule, and that's between about 1:30 and about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I do everything I can to keep that time free. Now, I have clients that sometimes put stuff in there, and I can't always avoid that, but I will not willingly put anything into 1:30 to 4. And usually in my calendar, there's a spacer that says, this is what I'm working on. I'm working on a business plan. I'm working on something for a client. And it's a thought. I'm protecting 2.5 hours a day. And I try to be honest, I try to protect noon to 4, is the time that I try. Now I have meetings typically from 4 to 6, and that's why or 4 to 7. So I have meetings in the late afternoon and I have meetings in the morning. In the middle of the day, I really try to keep it open so that I can think. One of the big things that people don't take into account is the ability to keep your mind plastic, and be able to actually think about things. And I get paid to think. I don't get paid to do things. I get paid to think about things. And so I have to constantly protect my ability to think, and so there's a bunch of things that I do there. But one of the things is holding big spaces open in my day so that I have time to germinate and think about things and, really have time to be creative. Another thing is that I protect my time to sleep. So I get up really early, but I also don't stay up very late, so I give myself a solid 8 hours. I usually don't sleep 8 hours. I don't think I'm not really capable of sleeping 8 hours, but I leave that amount of space opened that I could if I needed to. The other thing is that my calendar is if anyone who interacts with me, my calendar is everything. If you're not in my calendar, if you don't send me a calendar event, you should probably assume that I'm not going to show up. Like I'm not going to be there, and I won't feel bad because I won't even remember that it happened. Like I won't know that we had a meeting if it's not in my calendar. So, and I will admit, generally I have it like whoever's sending out the Zoom event owes me a calendar event, and so, and whoever's creating the Zoom owes the person if they're offering that. But I'm very, very driven by my calendar, and I fill my calendar up. So I put everything I'm going to do, not just meetings, but everything I want to do, I put in my calendar because it starts to represent. For me, it represents whether I'm actually available. Because it's easy to say, oh, I got a bunch of open spaces, but if I fill all those open spaces with meetings, I won't get anything done. Nothing comes out the other end. And so a lot of what I do is fill. So usually my day by the middle of Monday will look complete. The whole week is full. That it's all full of things that need to get done. And I know that if I'm having a meeting, I need to take something away from the time that I'm doing. So I'm consciously going, well, I was going to work on that, but now I'm putting a meeting in there. And there's a thought process that there's a loss there, not just like, oh, I got free space that I can put anything I want to into it. I'm pretty edgy about people who create meetings that are longer than half an hour. 25 minutes. 25 minutes to me is the right number for a meeting. If it's more than 25 minutes, this better be good. And we do have longer meetings. We had some over the weekend, but generally I try to keep meetings with folks to 25 minutes. I feel like not all the time, but most of the time it's just bad management. Now, when you're doing things where you have a whole bunch of people, 30, 40 people, or 20, like we had these volunteer meetings over the weekend, that's something that takes time to kind of discuss and work through things. But on a general meeting, it should be 25 minutes. Finally, the last things are, I try to make as few decisions in my personal life as possible on a day-to-day basis. It's not that I don't make them, but I try to minimize the number of decisions. And my wife will tell you that I'm constantly saying I can't process that right now. Like I'll just say I can't. That's not something I can talk about, because I can't allow it. As someone who is a little ADD, I can't allow things into my mind. So, someone says, "Oh, I just want to talk to you for 5 minutes." It's not 5 minutes for me. like it's not, like it's 5 minutes for you. For me, it's 2 hours. Because you're going to talk to me for 5 minutes and get my mind racing up on something that wasn't in my head and wasn't part of what I was doing today. And now you want me to think about that. So I will not meet with people or not talk to people about things very purposefully until I'm ready to think about it, because I don't have I'm working on something else right now. I make all my lunches, and I have the same breakfast every morning. I make all my lunches on Sunday. So, and I make my salads on Sunday, or I buy the stuff for my salads on Sunday, to minimize the number of things I have to do during the day. The dinner is variable. Sometimes I don't eat it. But I don't like to think during the day about what I'm going to eat. It's just it's wasted CPU power. So anyway, those are some of the things that I do. I also wear mostly the same clothes. I mean, I wash everything. So I'm wearing clean clothes all the time, but I don't vary very much. I've got a couple, working at home, I've got a couple pairs of cargo shorts, and I've got a couple shirts that I just keep washing every day, but I don't like making decisions that don't need to be made. If they're not going to be intrinsic to moving the idea forward, I try to keep them to the side, and then I try to have all my emergencies. Anything I have to work on in the house is usually over the weekend. I don't let myself deal with it during the week, because otherwise I wouldn't get anything done. So.
That's funny, because I had to come into the studio today and I was like, wait, now I got to figure out what pants to wear, because I typically have, if I'm at home in studio, at home or office or whatnot, I don't necessarily have to think about things. What you're essentially talking about is like decision fatigue, because that's taking away from...
You can only make so many decisions a day.
Right.
And people will say that that's not true, but it is. Like it's 100% true. And you can only make so many decisions in a day. You might get better at it or whatever, but you want to minimize the number of those decisions and the complexity of those decisions. So a lot of times, if you send me an email that requires something other than yes or no, the chance, a lot of times I won't get back to you, because I'm like, oh, I'll get to that, and that gets set off. There was my uncle used to work for Ted Turner, and no matter where Ted Turner was in the world, someone would walk up with a pile of paper, 20, 30 sheets of paper, and all of them had about 6 lines of something. We're planning to do this, or we're trying to do this, or whatever. And all there was a big yes, no. And he would just sit there, and at the speed he could read, he would just go yes, no, no explanation, no whatever. But that's all you got to do with Ted Turner, was ask him yes or no. And I thought that was a great model. So I usually, I will think about things and talk to people about them. But the longer I really feel like people aren't being considerate when they send lots of long emails. That's something that I'm always surprised that people do that. But I don't really like a lot of buildup, or I just need people to get to the point most of the time of what they want. So I think that, and I try to do that when I send emails. If I send someone a long email, it means it was a big deal, and you won't see another one of those for a long time. Because I feel like it's inconsiderate.
If I send a long one, it's probably Siri, and I'm talking into my phone and sending you that email. That's exactly the only way. Otherwise, it's yes, copy that, etc. For me, I have, and I mentioned that 12-week yearbook that really, really helped me to look at, okay, so take a step back. And so the idea is that most people, or most organizations, when it comes to planning and the goals that they have set for the year, they kind of like they'll start off in January, whenever their planning session is, and then they will coast a little bit. And then it's when they get to Q3 and 4, they're like, oh, we're not on track. And then they get all this work done in a 90-day period. And so essentially the idea is that, well, you first do your big vision planning, get those goals in place, but you give yourself 12 weeks, which is like 90 days for each of those goals. So it's kind of like you're looking at each quarter as a year based on that concept. And for me, what that helped me do was just vision planning and putting those things in place, but the time blocking, which is much of what Alex shared of how he plans his day. But for me, the importance of protecting that time at the beginning of the week where I am thinking, again, 1,000% to what Alex says, giving yourself time and capacity to think and to debrief and to strategize. And especially if you are, and I'm throwing this out to the panel, that saying is like, we all have the same amount of time. We all have 24 hours. We do not all have 24 hours. We have 24 hours, but how you use them varies so much. So that's, whenever I hear that quote, it's just like, oh, I am, I'm a founder. I am a mother. I am sometimes a caregiver. Like there's so many things that are always competing for my time and attention. And when it comes to time management, not only prioritizing your task and delegating, I'm sure some questions will come in around that and how we do that, but then the ability to give yourself, time to think and react. There was something, it was a couple Sundays ago where Grant was on, and he mentioned that when he's working with his team, that he makes sure, like if they're on site, that they're not pushed like 100% capacity. By the time you get to being on site, it's like, I might misquote the numbers, but it was like that they should be at 40% capacity, so that 60% of the time, if something happens or comes up, that they're able to react. And that's the way I look at my time management is, okay, I protect Sundays, and that's the time where I'm doing all of these things and mapping it out. You most likely are not going to be able to schedule a meeting with me on the same week because I've already mapped that out. And like Alex said, the time that it takes to, somebody says 5 minutes, but there's so much planning that I'm doing before I get into the meeting. So by putting that, unless it's client and there's a fire, those things, take precedence. But and we haven't really mentioned tools yet, but like Calendly. So that takes out the back and forth with, hey, what time works for you? What times works for you? No, I have certain Calendlys for certain tasks. Like, okay, if this is training, here's this Calendly, and it's organized according to my calendar. Oh, if this is, hey, you just want to ask a quick question, here's the Calendly for that. So really organizing those things. I would say also organization is a huge component and a huge part of being able to manage your time. And we haven't even got into when you're now managing people and what that looks like I remember when I was working at the state, and my director at the time, she was managing a team of maybe like 6, and she'd get there super early, but then she was still there till like 7 and 9. And I now get it, because she was spending a lot of her time making sure that everyone, was on task. If people needed assistance, like when you are the team lead, your priority is to make sure that everybody has the tools and the resources that they need to do their job, on top of the fact that she had to do her job. And that's where she was working, later to get her task out of the way. So for me, that means I'm a morning person. I know where my zone of genius is. So I'm up super early, sometimes 3, 4 in the morning. And that's just me getting myself together, my quiet time, my prayer time. And then now, okay, what is the most important thing that needs to happen in the day? Because I try my best to get that handled in the beginning, first couple hours, because once that day, I say when the world wakes up, anything and everything could happen. And if there's this task or goal or proposal that needs to get out, well, I'm going to make sure that I do that when I have the uninterrupted time. And that's another phrase, like the importance of having that time where you're able to think, you're able to to strategize and not have interruptions, because how many of us, like, the phone rings, the notification goes off, the spouse or child, they come in, and then that can kind of derail that focus that you have in, doing those elements. So those are just like some quick thoughts around like how I look at managing time, how this is something I'm still working on. So I'm looking forward to the rest of this conversation to see the ways other panelists and even, share your comments as well. And I will say this too, Alex, I remember you saying, like, 25-minute, like, even when I was in this accelerator program, a lot of the investors that I noticed, they had, I think it was anywhere between like 15, 20-minute blocks. That was their time. And I was like, there's something to that, and not the blanketed hour or even half an hour. Like, it's that 25-minute, because when you say, okay, we're going to wrap, it takes another 5 minutes to wrap the conversation. So there are people that I work with that they're a stickler. They either give the warning at the like 20-minute mark. Okay, so looking at our time so that you let the other person know. But then at that mark, it's a wrap.
And that drives the conversation too. So when you have a 25-minute meeting and you have a lot to cover, that means you have an agenda. That means it starts on time. That means you're moving through the conversation quickly. Those are all things that, now, I will say that there is something to be said for long conversations about things, but not with a lot of people. I keep in mind how many people are in the meeting and what their average salaries are, and I can very quickly tell you roughly how much this meeting cost. I was in a meeting at the White House with 50 people, and it went through my head like, this is a really expensive meeting, so keep it quick and make sure that you're going to ask the questions that you have and get everything you need out of this, because you're spending a lot of money. And I think that we want to make sure that we want to always be conscious of how much money we're spending on that in that time.
Yeah. And to your point about the long conversations, well, then I also have dedicated days where I recognize typically there aren't too many demands. I can have those virtual teas, or when people just want to, hey, I want to connect. And I understand like where those kind of conversations could go. And those are relationship building conversations as well, and giving time and space for those things. But those being on dedicated days to, again, reduce the decision fatigue. Because could you imagine like every week being different? That just impacts muscle memory, impacts your productivity. Let's go with Bill.
Well, I'm going to take a slightly different tack on this, and it's only because when I think of time, for my whole career looking back at it, I vary time blocks, and I think about it in terms of like music. There are a lot of areas in my life where I've had to march. I mean, just march through meetings and structure and be there at 9 o'clock, and that happens at 9:15, and that happens at 9:04. It's very much what you're talking about. And without that consistent pulse of every bit of time needs to be measured and taken care of, you don't succeed when you have to march. I mean, that, marching and the pace at which you march when you need to march is an important thing. That's probably why the military relies on it so much, to get that discipline and getting everybody going at the same pace at the same time. There's also other kinds of time, though. I feel like when I edit, I move over to waltz time, and it is more free-flowing and it is more fluid, and I'm not concerned so much with hitting deadlines. And that kind of moves me into what I call jazz time, where literally there are players that play behind, there are players that play ahead of the beat. They're looking for something out of the ordinary to use for pacing a piece of effort. And I love being able to be granted the freedom to move into that time. And then there's the tone poem guys who just, men and women, the composers who throw it away and just say, I'm going to look at time differently. I'm going to take large blocks and do something. Maybe I'll take a whole day and work on the paragraph of a poem, because that is important to me, to be that precise and work at it that hard. And for me, I want my life to be lived on a variety of time things that I can pull out when it's appropriate, when I'm allowed to do that. And to me, a red flag is when I've been stuck in one for a long period of time. Now, I've needed to be stuck in one during the most productive part of my career when I was at a desk every morning because everybody depended on me being at the desk in the morning. You know, you're on march time for a long time, and that is appropriate, and the world expects that, and my bosses loved it because I was at that seat at 8 o'clock, and I didn't vary that at all. But boy, I found that I was desperate on the weekends to get off of march time and to get into a waltz or jazz or something else so that I could refresh myself and knowing that my life was not going to be one long march to retirement. And then I was tossed out on the street without the ability to do anything but march. So my 2 cents worth.
That was really great, Bill, because you also touched on the fact that for many of us that you're managing the business side, but the creative side, giving yourself space to create and design and what goes into that process. So I think that is very valid.
It's how it worked for me through my career. And I think the satisfaction came for me. This is how my brain is wired. You know, maybe if and I'm not, this is not pejorative, but if you're a CPA, maybe you need to march all the time because you just got to get the numbers in on time and get them right in the cells. And maybe that's completely satisfying for that person. For me, I spent more time than I would have hoped before I went self-employed and was able to direct it marching. And I always felt a little constrained by that. And I always felt like I had to get away from it. Since I stopped doing that, I've never felt like I had to get away from my schedule because I always built in that amount of time for jazz.
And for our producers, continue. I see there's some great conversation happening in the chat. Ike just said, find your shuffle. So please submit your questions and your comments as we continue this conversation around time management. Alex?
Yeah, and I would just say to underline what Bill said is that, you know, really having open space is really important. If you're being creative, you gotta not have it. And one thing that I will say is, as you look at your schedule, I cluster meetings. So I have the meetings back to back to back. It may sound like it's hard, but I do that so that I have people say, well, you need safety to do whatever. I don't do that because otherwise I don't have a day left. Because if I start having every meeting a half an hour apart, that, you know, the problem is you're coming out of one meeting and you're a little more lax. You end that meeting a little late, and then you go get a couple other things. Nothing gets done, you know, in that period of time. And so I usually will back my meetings up back to back to back. Now, if it's a new meeting with a new client about a new product, I schedule a 15 or 30-minute block before that meeting that I'm going to do research, you know, or sometimes an hour. I had a meeting on Friday with a client that I hadn't seen before, might be doing a bunch of things with them. I spent 2 hours looking at their content, just watching all their content, absorbing. Like, first I just watched it to see how I felt. Then I started breaking down how they use cameras, how they use content, what kind of content do they do. And I really had a structure so that when I'm in that meeting with them, I'm productive in it. But I didn't just say, oh, I'm going to do that. I put a block in there to make that happen.
Jason?
I too am paid to talk and paid to think, and I am highly ADD. So the combination of those two has meant that I need to take technology and use it as my metronome, because if I don't, everything's lost. And, you know, I will tap dance the entire day away and I won't even miss it. That's just how I'm wired. So ballpark, the way that has worked out for my schedule is that weekends are sacred to my personal life. And, you know, waking up early is important at least most days. And, yes, meetings get clustered towards the beginning and the end of the day. For me, that works very well too. And that time in the middle is either time that I'm spending directly with clients, creating and presenting what I'm thinking of, or time that I'm intentionally creating for flow. And flow to me feels like it's the greatest feeling ever, probably because it's really hard for me to get there. And once I'm there, it feels like I'm underwater, and nothing else is really going to bother me. And the minute something does, yes, an entire hour or two are completely and totally lost. So yes, underlying everyone on that one. It's really hard to switch context.
And you even saying that part, like you're paid to talk and think, I was like, that's a t-shirt right there. But even all of us, we're here in many of our skill sets and roles. The amount of research we're paid to study, to know what's coming, to think through those systems and processes. So thanks for that, Jason. Courtney?
Yeah, my time management skills have kind of been blown out because I started in live radio. And if you ever worked in live radio, you know that the FCC requires logs and you have to log everything. And if I worked in at a radio station that was a network affiliate, so we had to hit, CBS News on the hour exactly to the second. And the radio station was owned by the Johnson family, Lyndon and Lady Bird. And because of that, it was under a lot of scrutiny by the FCC. So we had to log every single second of airtime on a written log. We had to log each commercial, when it started, when it ended, to the second. Each section, each piece of music we played, we could choose the music. But we had to log when it started, when it stopped, and all the seconds and stuff had to add up. So this became a huge nightmare for me. We had printed logs pre-printed logs that took care of the main stuff that we knew had to hit certain time marks on there. Were already on there. But maintaining that time schedule and fitting into that time slot was always a lot of work. Then I moved from radio into film, which is just the opposite. You couldn't schedule anything because on a film set in production, you don't know how long your day is going to be. It depends on how it goes. How many retakes do we do? Well, we got to shoot out this location, so we're going to go to a 14-hour day instead of an 8-hour day or a 12-hour day. So you never know. You can never plan anything if you're working on a film shoot because you don't know what your schedule is going to be like. You can't even have pets because you don't know if you're going to be able to get off and feed them in time, or you're going to be stuck on the set for 16 hours. And you can't just walk away and say, hey, I got to go feed my dogs. So it kind of made me really eschew time scheduling now that I'm retired. I don't like to schedule a lot of stuff. The only stuff that I schedule, I use Google Calendar for. Doctor's appointments and things, I allow myself enough time to make, or an occasional job I'll schedule and I'll know I have to try and be there on time or at least a half an hour early. But yeah, I'm kind of averse to time management these days.
And Alex?
One thing I'll say in live production is, like everything else, we say be 40% capacity or 60% capacity, is I leave a lot of time for error. so I create huge gaps I double the amount of time that I think it's going to take to do everything. I have it, and when everything works, we are just sitting there noodling around and making sure that everything's just right. But there's tons of room to have things go wrong. For instance, when I started doing this when I was DJing weddings, 30 years ago, is that I would show up twice the time that it took to get there. So it was an hour and a half away, or it was 1.5 times the time it took to get there. So if I was an hour away from something, I would show up an hour and a half early. And if I was 2 hours away, I would show up 3 hours early. And because what I was doing is adding a gap. Now, how that magnifies itself is when I went to Tokyo, I was a day and a half early. And we got there a day and a half early. In fact, what we did is we sent our crews. We had one crew that showed up early and one crew that showed up late. And the crew leaving San Francisco didn't get on the plane until it was usually a couple hours before they get on the plane by the time the crew landed, so that if we lost any gear in the in-between, we would know and put it on that second crew video. But when you talk about logistics of time planning, we would plan like when we're getting there, and all of those things, we added lots and lots and lots of time. It's super valuable in a live event. It's very unforgiving, and almost nobody else that we work with, except for experienced event people, will do that. They'll be like, oh, I can do it in 2 hours. I set it up in the lab in 2 hours. If I can set it up in the lab in 2 hours, I'm going to tell the client I need 6. And I'll settle for 4. But if I know that, and so that's the kind of time frame you want to keep on adding those buffers, and it really makes you look good, because everything just works. It makes it a harder conversation 3 weeks before the event when you're demanding all this extra time, and it makes you look good during the show because you're calm and the event just happens.
Let's get into these questions, Bill.
Our first one comes from Laura Thompson in Beaumont, Texas. Liberty, do you use a weekly time grid to plan your week, and have you found a more effective tool?
So, Laura, hopefully, if you can put in the chat somewhere. So, I'm not familiar with what a time grid is, but if you're referring to the fact, do I have like scheduled days and set days for certain things, certain projects, tasks? Yes, absolutely. I would not be able to do it otherwise. As I mentioned, Sunday. My planning actually is Sunday and Friday, really, because Friday is like looking at the next week. As I said, trying to shut down Calendly or some of the other tools to just protect time from that perspective. And Sunday is really putting things in place, reviewing what's already been done. Do I need to send emails to the team to remind them of certain things? Making sure, I'm still working on this one, making sure that, Zoom wise, or like, did we get the confirmations on, particular meetings? So yes, I definitely do that. And as has been shared as well, is because I do start on Sunday, so it's not necessarily a typical like Monday to Friday, then the middle of the week, I also protect that time because I know that the beginning of the week there's so much happening. And then, okay, here's my decompressed day, mainly creative or lighter task, and because then it ramps up again towards the end of the week. Next question.
Next one comes from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. Do you use a high-tech or low-tech method of time management? Calendar, time, task list, apps, or post-it notes and blank paper? What sequence of methods or combination of methods do you use for different projects or tasks?
Go ahead, Bill.
In this respect, iOS has changed everything for me because for most of my career, I relied on calendars and Post-it notes and other things. When I find, and I think it was originally the skeuomorphic address book and me having one place to put all my contact and telephone numbers, when I realized that would ping to my computer and other things would be synchronized, so losing the address book, and this was decades ago, did not lose my contacts. A little light bulb went on in my brain, and I feel the same way about calendar. This system of being able to enter it once and have it show up on all the devices across my life in sync has literally changed everything for me. And it's just that idea of a centralized point of truth for scheduling has changed everything.
Courtney?
Yeah, I'm like Bill. I used to write everything on a calendar stuck on the side of the fridge. In fact, I've had that habit for so many years. I still have a new calendar that I stick on the side of the fridge. I almost never write anything on it anymore, but all my appointments would be written on that calendar on the side of the fridge. So every morning I get up, I could look and see what I'm doing today, the next day, the next day, or the next week. However, when Google Calendar came around and I discovered the fact that I could put it on my phone and on my PC, and it synchronized automatically between the two, and it would give me notifications on 15 minutes ahead of when I was supposed to be somewhere, and it tied into all my contacts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's what I moved to. I just use Google Calendar now for managing all my scheduling, and it's very easy because it interfaces with Google Voice control, so I can just be sitting in my car and make an appointment, and it'll put it into my calendar via voice.
So this is blending like all my worlds together. So the work side, but then also personal side. I still do paper at times of just like writing it down, especially the night before, like I have this like small book that is literally only like what's the next day that needs to happen. And it literally has maybe like 3 or 4. If it gets beyond that, a lot of the stuff below the fold is probably not going to happen. But so I can physically like check things off. But then I also have that, again, going back to the beginning of the week of like putting all of those things in place on my calendar. I also use alarms for like level 3, like press the red button type of things that need to because if I'm in the middle of a meeting or I know that there's something that needs to be done at an off-peak time that I typically wouldn't do something, I have alarms, and it's probably like 2 or 3 alarms to help through that. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Dave Troutman in Edmonton, Canada. I've tried a number of work tracking tools. I'm not satisfied with the information they gather for billing. Does anyone have a recommendation for Mac or iPad?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I used to have this problem too for doing payroll or for time cards. And there are time card apps that you can find for iOS that are in the App Store that manage your time will keep track of your daily work schedule and do a calculation of your total hours and overtime hours and so on once you enter all this stuff in. Another thing is if you have a payroll company, check their website, because companies like ADP or Paychex will have apps that you can use to run time cards on your employees and calculate the time cards and keep you in compliance if you're having to do calculation on employees to comply with their payroll taxes and with overtime hours after a certain number of hours and so on, to keep you in compliance. They're great for that. And they keep track of that, and they maintain permanently in the cloud. So you can go back and look at a time card later if there's ever a dispute. So I use a lot of those tools.
Chris?
Dave, specifically for the Mac or iOS, I think you said or iPad, same thing. There's an application that we use in our office called Harvest, and it allows you to create different tasks, which could have different billing rates per client. You can sort by client, you can sort by job number, and you can tap it and say, oh, I'm starting to work. And then you can tap it again when you're done working on that task. You can change the task later. If you forget to turn it off, which I do often, after about 12 hours, it says, really? You're still working on that? So it'll send you a little message. So you can go, oh, you can go back and you can turn it off and fix it. But it's all in the cloud. You can use it on your computer. There's a little Mac menu pull down thing, or you can use it on your phone. We've used it for years and it works well.
And I think Harvest is also like integrates into some other project management tools, if I remember correctly,
Sure.
like Asana,
probably does.
but it's just an add-on to use for that. Next question.
Also,
Well,
it's called harvestapp.com, I think. So if you're looking for it,
Thanks,
Harvest
Chris.
app.
Walt Palmer in Lewis, Delaware says, is there a rule of thumb to the amount of time expected to return an email? I've received emails saying, I wrote to you yesterday and you've not responded. I'm not aware of a specific time to respond or the need to respond at all.
Jason.
This falls back to one of my maxims, which is you have complete control over exactly one person in this world, and it's you. And other people don't necessarily have a rule of thumb that they follow through with. It depends. To me, it's generally one business day, and if not, it's going to be a week. And that just depends on the structure and kind of the mean time between messages in that particular thread.
Alex?
I have to admit, I do my best to get back to people, but a lot of times if I'm in a project, I don't look at my email. so sometimes it could take a week for me to get back to somebody. And if they send me, there is an inverse relationship to the speed at which I'll respond to the length of the email. So if you send me a long email, the chances of me getting back quickly is very low. In fact, it may be over about 15 lines on my email. The chances of me getting back to you ever is pretty low. I don't really do long emails, and so I think that's usually part of it. Someone who wrote what you just saw there, that's something I would never write to anyone, not even someone I didn't like. And so coming back to people and giving them a hard time for being late on an email is just really bad form. Like just to be clear, like don't be, it's really hard to read things in the text. So if I'm going to come back and I need something from someone, it'll always be like, hey, just checking in just to see if, I'm working on this thing and I just wanted to, but be super nice about following up with people. Being curt over email is devastating to your own interaction with folks. And you can, they say that trust enters on foot and exits on horseback. Your relationship with someone can get poisoned really fast with one bad email. So just always think about that before you hit send.
Courtney?
Yeah, I used to think, just give me a call, leave a message on my answering machine. At the end of the day, I'll check my messages and see about, what calls I need to return. But then we moved to email, and then it got to be where scheduling work, booking work, in other words. People get really impatient when they're looking for someone. They've got a schedule to fill. They'll send out an email. If they don't hear back from you, whoever responds first gets the job. So now it's a competition these days for booking work. You're in a competition on who can respond first. So I tend to look at my email a little more frequently, as long as I can. Sometimes you're put in a situation where you have to surrender your phone, or you're on set somewhere and you have to keep it turned off. So you don't know you're receiving emails. I try and check it a couple of times a day. But if you don't respond quickly, they'll move on to somebody else. They'll say, "Oh, thanks for responding, but we already have somebody. Thanks anyway." So these days, I try and respond quickly. Otherwise, as long as I want the job, if I don't want the job, I'll kind of let it go for a day, and maybe it'll go away, and then I'll respond and say, "Oh, did you find someone, or do you still need someone?" And so I'll respond politely. So in case in the future they have a job that I want to work on, I won't completely alienate them by not returning their email, but I will respond and say, sorry, I was tied up in production or something. I'll make an excuse. And if they're telling me, "Oh, we've got a 3-day shoot at the beach in the sand," I'll go, "Oh, gee, sorry I didn't get back to you. My schedule is changing right now and I can't work on those days."
Bill?
I read that and I see an emotional manipulator and I don't want to deal with them at all, period. That to me is a very passive aggressive way to start any kind of communication. It tells me there's probably a sales call and I do not want to deal with it. I will also say though that I've gotten more sensitive to building expectations with clients. Normally my schedule is flexible enough where I can respond really quickly. And for people in office hours and things like that, it's not unusual for getting a ping and immediately responding. On the other hand, I have clients that come here, and when they're sitting behind me, I might take 7 hours away. We barely break for lunch, and we're getting something done. So if I'm not back to somebody in a day, if I've built the expectation that they'll hear from me always within an hour, and then I break that expectation by being away from 7 hours, they get a little more titchy about it, I think. It's like, this isn't his norm. What's wrong? Is he ignoring me? Is he ghosting me? What's going on? And it's not that. It's just that I never built the expectation that some days I'm in session and I'm not going to respond. So I do pay attention to the expectations I build with various clients, authors, other people as to how I'm going to normally respond to them. And sometimes I'll admit I sit on something I could respond to right now just because I don't want to build the expectation in that particular vendor or client or whomever that I will always be back to them in 10 minutes.
That's very fair and true. And just pulling in, Jesse says, being nice is most important. We have no idea what's going on in someone else's life. And that's really what I was going to say, like reading this. Well, Walt, I don't know what the relationship is that you have with that person, if it's a coworker, outside person. But typically, one of the things I look at is, okay, people, that's their priority. Their priority is that they're looking for this response from you. In setting possible expectations, I've seen people with email responders that say, hey, we typically get back in this amount of time. If there are coworkers, like internally, we have a structure of like email is responding this many times. If we've messaged on Slack and sent an email, that's like a level 2. And then, hey, if you get the email and the text message. So it's really about understanding expectations and always giving people grace. So hopefully that gets rectified moving forward. Next question.
Dave Troutman in Edmonton, Canada says, interruptions are the biggest challenge for me. How many interruptions do you tolerate in your planning time?
Alex?
All of my notifications are turned off. So my phone might have alarms like Liberty has, like I need to absolutely do something. Now, I will say that I pretty carefully check between every meeting, like at the end of every meeting, I look at my schedule, like what do I have next? And I kind of have a picture of what's going on in my head of what that day is going to look like there. But outside of that, I don't have any notifications on anywhere. I mean, I turn everything off. I don't want something randomly talking to me about anything, and if you're the kind of person that calls me without texting me and saying, hey, if it's okay to talk right now, and you just call on the phone, either I won't pick up the phone, but I'll also decide I don't know if I need to work with you anymore. So, high, what I consider high maintenance. If someone calls me straight out, it better be an emergency. Like the house better be on fire, for someone to call me without texting and saying, hey, is it okay to talk right now? Or more importantly, scheduling something tomorrow. Liberty schedules out a day, unless you are my main client, scheduling a meeting the same day that talking about a meeting to happen later in the day is not appropriate. Like, just so you know, like asking someone to do that, like, hey, let's meet at 4. How about let's meet tomorrow? Like, and really at least start there, or ask what the date times are for people. There's a process. I have to admit that there's Calendly is a very here in the Bay Area. It's very there's a lot of controversy because people don't like it, and so there's people who use it all the time and they love it. The people who use it love it. The people who are being pushed to Calendly often feel like it's like and I have to admit that I just never, I don't have any strong opinion about it, but I never schedule anything. If someone sends me a Calendly, it means I'll figure it out at some point in the future. And that some point never happens. So usually Calendly is where back and forth go to die for me. So.
Jason.
When I'm in flow, it is impossible to reach me electronically or by phone. Unless you are a family member who can open that door behind me, you can't reach me, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
And I'll just add, just rereading what you said, like how many interruptions, Dave, you said, how many interruptions do you tolerate in planning time? Well, that depends on like how critical that time is, because if I understand that if this does not happen, like it throws the rest of the week, month, quarter off, like that's absolutely no interruptions. And I also communicate to those who could possibly be the ones interrupting, because unless something is on fire, whatever it is probably not critical. So that's the way I look at it. And it's taken time for me to give myself permission to say, no, you will not interrupt this time because I need it. Next question.
Next one comes from Dorcas Wisdom in Bronx, New York. How do you manage making sure you spend quality time with your family and family events? Do you have a schedule?
Alex.
I schedule that too. So I definitely, generally dinner in my family is 7:00. And so, I'm usually done at whatever I'm going to do in the day, is usually done by 7. And then I'm usually off. And there's kind of a rule of thumb that I won't talk about work. And I also won't talk about, I don't want to talk about anything wrong with the house or anything that has to get done after 7, because I'm in a landing procedure to go to sleep, and there's like, we're coming into the runway, and there's the sleep runway is about 2 hours long for me that just slowly cruises in, and then I go to sleep, and I fall asleep in minutes. But one of the big rules is I won't look at anything that would upset me. I don't want to talk to anyone. I don't want to I don't look at Twitter anymore. I don't, there's a whole bunch of things that just get turned off as I just go into the cycle of just hanging out with the family. I also schedule time with my kids. My 2 younger kids, my son has something on Sunday. My daughter has something on Saturday that they choose to do. Might go to the farmer's market, might go to a movie, whatever. It's their time. And I do that every week, that they're home. They're in Pennsylvania right now, but we do stuff together. I didn't always do that, and I regret it. Like no one ever says that when they're laying on their deathbed that they wish they worked more. So just always keep that in mind. Like I wish I had just done a little bit more work. I wish I had put that last paper in. They almost always say that they wish they'd spent more time with their family. So really take that into account as you design what your life is going to look like. There was a solid decade that I flew 250,000 miles a year. I was gone 2/3 of the year. My kids at first were upset and then didn't care, didn't notice that I was gone. I got to where I am now because I did that, but I would never do it again. So I work hard, and I don't mind working hard. It's the travel and not having any time with your kids month after month is something that I would avoid.
Bill?
This has always been such a difficult thing, and I don't think it's ever going to get any easier, because you're making this choice. Are you working for their future, and that means you keep your head down and you do the work, or are you taking time for the present away from maybe building for the future? And I know, as a small business owner who's had my own schedule for a long time, it was tough in those years. I had exactly the same feeling that Alex did. While I was trying to build my reputation and get enough clients to sustain us, I would just say I must spend my time thinking about making a living, period. And I left it to my wife to manage the other stuff. Eventually, I was able to get to the point where I could start coming around, and I did feel bad about how much time I had spent away from that. She is also as competent, if not more competent, in most things than I am. So, the fact that she wanted to do that piece of the puzzle made it natural, but I did find myself having to stop myself from always coming down on the side of now's the time to build an economic future for the family, and I just have to think about that. And if it means I have to work three weeks straight and not pay attention to the family side of my life, I will do that. But exactly like Alex, I look back and I go, I wish I could have balanced better in the early days. I wish I had the tools I have now that allows me to do more with less. So I could have taken some of that time and devoted it to the family early. Thank God I was able to get out of it as fast as I did and then spend the last half enjoying a better balance in life.
And for me, yes, it's a hard yes. My daughter and I think pretty much since she was like maybe 2, for the most part, we have girls' night, and we have the song "Girls' Night." And she still sings it. She's now 9. She still sings it. And so just carving out that time, and I do my best that like if something pops up, I, as best as possible, doesn't always work, but that I can't do that because that like she needs to see as much as she sees her mom doing all this amazing stuff work-wise, she needs to know that she's number one, showing up at family events. And even if I have to travel for them, I'm realizing even more and more now, like that's important because with all, like Alex said, all the things that might come with it, that they're going to remember whether you were present or not. And so just really making an effort to make that happen. Bill, real quick.
Yeah, real quick. I just want to say also families can be messy and that's part of what they're for. And, they're your family. This is not something you can option out of. So if somebody in your family, close family, or even a slightly extended family is going through a crisis, sometimes that's going to pull you away from things. And that's a moral decision you have to make. Am I going to be here just for me and my team, or am I going to extend myself out and try to help the people in my family who are having some sort of crisis? That can be very difficult to do. So just keep that in mind. Sometimes life's not easy.
Next question.
Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas. What about equipment and supplies storage? How do you manage your time spent on it? And what do you do with obsolete gear and unlabeled gear? For example, power supplies and wall warts.
Courtney.
Well, to answer the last part of that question first, I always label the wall wart when it comes with a piece of gear with the name of the gear that it goes with and a little labeler. So invest in one of those Great Brother labelers, which we've talked about before, the little portable battery powered ones. And as far as gear storage, out of sight is out of mind. And that's a problem for me because, especially with supplies, if I'll buy 3-4 printer cartridges because I got a good price on them and I'll put them in storage, which is not at the house here, and I forget about it, I'll order more and not realize that I have 4 sitting on the shelf in storage. And so I end up with a lot of extra stuff. And as far as obsolete gear goes, hold on to it. I'm a pack rat and tend to not throw stuff away, which is a big problem because then it accumulates and you're paying a lot for storage then more than it's probably worth. But if you wait long enough, there's going to be some idiot that wants to rebuild a vintage VIC-20 or something, and those chips have become so rare that they'll pay $400 for that, $30 item that's been sitting on a shelf for 30 years. So, if you hold on to it long enough and pay $300 or $400 a month to store it, hey, it may be worth $100 someday.
Next question.
Craig McFarland, Boston, Massachusetts. How often do you look back on your recent activity to check in on your productivity? Weekly, monthly, only when overwhelmed?
Oh, that's a great one there. So I know that I typically am looking back, like I mentioned, that Friday day where typically we have some sort of team debrief and we look back at some things we're doing a much better job now, just even looking at some of the activities and what needs to, I'm in this mode of like, what do we need to stop doing? That's like been one of my things all year. What do we need to stop doing? What do we need to stop doing to make room and capacity for the things that we should be doing more? So I'll say weekly, monthly, definitely quarterly. Alex?
Usually my measure is that I have a lot of things that are due to a lot of different people all the time. So my productivity is usually putting out each one of those on a curve. And usually those big sections of things that I have there are usually, I have one of the things that keeps me productive, I have to admit, are meetings where I have to show what I was working on, because then I have a deadline, and so I work very well against deadlines, and so I oftentimes, if I'm trying to get something done, I usually am presenting it to somebody and showing them or having to deliver it for their feedback on a certain schedule, and that usually keeps me going. It usually makes that the priority pretty quickly if there's a delivery somewhere.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from Roscoe Jones in Madison, Indiana. Conflicts can take up large amounts of time. Do you plan for them or work hard to eliminate them?
Jason?
Bruce Lee said the best way to block a punch is to not be there. So my answer is both. You work to avoid them, you try to get ahead of them, and then if you can't avoid them, then you face them head on. It's that simple.
Alex?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. It's a really complicated question. So the first thing, as Jason said, I really decide what I want to get into a conflict about. There's a lot of things that I would consider first world problems that, when there's something someone might do that I'm annoyed by or something like that, but I'm going to make a decision about whether I really need to have a conversation about that. Like, is that just something I can process, or is that something that I need to actually have a conversation about? Also, if something starts to fester, it's much easier to handle immediately than it is to ignore it. So especially if you see conflict between people or entities that you're working with, allowing that to just keep on metastasizing just means that it's going to be a lot more to clean up later. So oftentimes I will try to clean things up relatively quickly. If I feel like I misspoke in an important way, a lot of times I'll try to clean that up fast, to have that conversation. And a lot of times I'm open to having those conversations. And I do leave big spaces, not big spaces. I leave a couple minutes, like a half an hour a day to just handle things that I didn't expect during my work day. And usually that's where I fit things like that into it. The other thing is that I surround myself with people that tend not to be high maintenance. So if someone is conflict prone, I will tend to work them out of my life. so that tends to be, it's not always the case, but if someone is going to be, if they create a lot of instability around me, especially at work, I have a tendency to not have them around for very long because I just it becomes difficult to get things done.
Next question.
Dave Troutman in Edmonton, Canada, has this one. I find that more people involved in my planning, the more difficult it is to control the time drain. Any people skills I need to handle this?
Jason?
Yeah, it always feels to me that an undisciplined group of people require 2 to the n number of people amount of time if it's in a meeting. And a disciplined group tends to be pretty efficient if it's under 10. As far as people skills are concerned, I would say if you're in charge of the meeting, start it and just pull through and treat it like a plot and be like, all right, so here we are wrapping up.
Bill?
People have the most potential and the most variability in being able to benefit or detract from your organization as any asset that you'll ever deal with. And as such, you're going to spend time with this. The balance of, is this person contributing so much that I have to put up with some negatives, or can I optimize this role with somebody? Can I find that magic person who just is easy to deal with and very good at what they do? That's the goal. But boy, it's hard to take care of because people are variable, not just in terms of what they bring to the table the first time you meet them, but how they evolve over time. Everybody's life changes. Sometimes that impacts your work.
Alex?
Yeah. Being assertive about what you want to do helps a lot. Like I go, hey, let's have a meeting now. Let's schedule it, or let's do this in this time, and not waiting for someone to give you those things, but to put those out. Another thing I'll just say is I used to race horses, quarter horses, race horses, and these horses were crazy. I mean, they were half thoroughbred, they were whatever. And I had one horse that I could barely ride because it would kick me a lot, or throw me and everything else. And my cousin is a champion barrel racer and champion roper. And she was visiting from Arizona. She got on that horse, and it was as if it was a little pony. Like, she literally didn't do anything different than I did, except she sat down on that horse, and whatever she was doing, it just acted like a little pony that was the nicest pony you've ever seen before. And I realized that it's not always the horse. just it might be me. But it was the most eye-opening thing I'd ever seen. It was just I just had, this is the way this horse is, and when you look at this is the way people are, just sometimes consider that it might not just be them. So,
Something that I found helpful is, if possible, if this is a meeting, like when you actually start doing these team meetings, either having one, making sure you've got an agenda and you've got either you be the person who is like strict on that time because you're setting a precedence for how this will go moving forward, and or bring in a project manager, even if someone on your team, but they're the ones that like in the meeting will be the individual who will keep that time track, so that one, you don't have to be it's like good cop, bad cop, so that's their responsibility. And that I find tends to help to just keep things much more organized and tight. And again, it's how you start a thing is how you end a thing. Alex?
Last thing, really quickly, let people choose their own timelines. When can you get this done by? When will you have this ready to go? When you give it to them and they don't own it, and when they don't own it, they don't do it. So like, when can you, sometimes there's external deadlines, like then it's how do we get it done by then? But it's asking questions of people around you of how to get it done or when can they have it done, and then making plans against that is really, really important.
Next question.
Next one comes from Roscoe Jones, Madison, Indiana. What's the relationship between time management and the stress level on any given project? Can you overplan a project?
Jason? Sorry.
I'll answer the last question first. You can badly plan a project, meaning you can outstrip you can over designate for an inspecific amount of time, and then the whole thing becomes a traffic jam. So if you've ever overplanned, congratulations. I've never done it, but I have badly planned.
Bill?
For me, the answer is, oh, yes, and you should early in your career. You should try to figure out everything that could possibly affect your project, no matter what it is, and you will eventually, as you get more experience, cut back and realize what is actually important versus what you thought imagining it would be important.
Well, that was a great conversation around time management because we are at time. Thank you so much to our producers for all of your fantastic questions. And I see the chat was on fire again today. To our panelists for your insights and information and your stories, tips as well. And of course, to our production team, for without which this would not be possible. I do want to say, so tomorrow, Tuesday, we have Photoshop generative imagery. So that will take place during the second hour, a great AI conversation, as well as check your inbox for the fantastic email that gets sent out each and every day that gives you the schedule for the week. You can check officehours.global for the rest of the schedule. And speaking of, we have gone, 68,807 miles. That's 110,733 kilometers. That's more than 544 million bananas for scale. That's 2.8 times around the earth. Thank you so much, everyone. And we will see you in after hours. Bye.
Sometimes it is the horse, but yeah.
Sometimes it's the horse, but not always.
It was Alex, that was one of your most insightful comments. I love it.
Sometimes I'm the horse and I don't know it. I mean,
Everyone's a critic.